you know, you need to be creative in piecing together your income, which means you got to be able to play all styles of music so that you never have to turn down a gig, because you never know what gig you're going to be on and someone else sees you and leads you to the next gig, and you want to get that positive spiral happening.
Rob, I'm very excited to have you here for a few reasons. First of all, not only are you just a great guy, you're a fantastic drummer, but what you have done as a force in the music industry, and specifically in the drumming industry, really has set a legacy of information way before the internet, of capturing information for people to see and witness. And so you really were the internet before the internet was invented. And it's a powerful thing when you think about it, because the information that you produced and that you allowed the world to see changed where the world was at. And I really believe from what you gave us in the music community, they realized, boy, if we had a device on the internet that was available, I think you were just like pre-YouTube. So it's powerful what you've done. Tell me, and your love for drumming and music, tell me where it began for you with music.
First, you know, I go way back, so I really started with Thomas Edison, and that's where the whole, you know, I started playing drums when I was 10 years old. I got a snare drum, which I still have, a Silver Sparkle Kent snare drum. It's in great shape. I just always wanted to, you know, at that age, I wanted to play drums. You know, eventually I saved money from working odd jobs, and I'd put $5 a month down and get a tom-tom and get a bass drum, and then for my birthday I'd get a floor tom. You know, it wasn't like a normal, like you get a basketball like when you're 10. I wanted the floor tom. And I played drums, you know, locally. You know, I was in a band. We won a battle of the bands. I think I was about 12. You know, I got to tell Carmine, we did the fudge version of "Keep Me Hanging On."
Carmine apiece, absolutely, yeah.
And at one point in the beginning, I had these mallets, and I did like this big cymbal, dramatic cymbal roll with the mallets, and I threw the mallets in the audience. Well, my father was there. He ran over and grabbed them because it was $3.50. He didn't want me to have to buy another pair of mallets. But we won that battle of the bands with my first band called the Revised Edition, you know.
Beautiful.
You know, I just love playing drums, and like all of us, you know, I had this little phonograph with this tiny little speaker. I would prop it up on books so I could hear it. It was like pre-headphones. And, you know, I'd play along with records, and, you know, it just was there.
What drummers were influencing you?
Mitch Mitchell.
Oh, right.
Really,
Hendrix, yeah.
You know, Hendrix, when the Hendrix record came out, it really, you know, kind of opened a whole new world, you know, it really changed the game for me.
Yeah.
Michael Shreve, I was a little too young to get to Woodstock, but when the movie came out and I sat in the theater and they had a loud sound system and his thing came on, that solo in Soul Sacrifice,
how beautiful.
Another mind blower.
Yeah.
A whole other story, just getting to know Michael years later. He was a teacher at the Collective when he was living in New York. We're dear friends. We're working on a project right now, something, you know, really special that he did with Elvin. So we're going to try to bring it to light. Drumming was just always there for me. I don't know why. You know, no one in my family played music. You know, there was my father liked jazz, and I eventually got to introduce him to Louis Bellson, which was a wonderful thing for him. And but it just was something I always wanted to do.
So you started playing with bands at that time?
Yeah, I was playing in garage bands. You know, I grew up in Westchester, New York, an hour north of the city, and you know, we played the high school dances, and you know, we couldn't play clubs at that point. And then I went off to college in Florida, and I got in a good band in Gainesville, Florida. We were pretty well known. We played fairly regularly in the bars and the clubs and some outdoor concerts, and that was a nice thing. And then when I got out of college with a degree in economics, it was like, okay, now what do I do? You know, where do I go? Like, whose door do I knock on with my economics degree? And I really wanted to play music. I was, you know, my heart was in it. So I reached out to Sam Ash near my house in White Plains, New York, and I sent a letter. I said, I'm going to be graduating college. I've always buy my stuff from you guys. Can I be considered for any kind of employment? I'm going to be moving back to New York, and you know, as soon as the semester ends, I graduate, blah, blah, blah. And I met the store manager. He hired me, and I worked for Ash in White Plains for a little while. I got very close with Bernice and Jerry.
Oh, beautiful
Still
people.
Unbelievable people.
Beautiful people.
Richie and Sammy. You know, I
Great guys.
did some gigs with Richie.
Yeah.
He's a good guitar player back
very
in the day.
good guitar, still a good guitar player.
And then from there, Jerry had asked me if I would consider, you know, working at the 48th Street store, and it was, you know, my reason for doing it, besides trying to earn a little bit of a paycheck, was to meet musicians, because I had been in school in Florida for 4 years, so I kind of knew almost no one.
Out of touch, yeah.
So I figured that would be a good way to meet people and try to talk my way into, you know, getting to do some playing and gigs and, you know, learning what the whole scene was like. Then I started commuting into the city and working on 48th Street, which was an unbelievable experience. The heyday, you know, really of 48th Street with, you know, the whole block was just one store after another.
And they got to understand, 48th Street in New York City was the haven of just one store after another when you went down there.
A block, yeah. Both sides of the street, up in stores up on the second floor, first floor.
Yeah.
Every musician that came into New York, you know, guys, if they were playing Madison Square Garden, well, that afternoon they would stop on, you know, walk around. You'd see anybody. You know, Manny's had that wall of photographs with Hendrix and Cream and, you know,
powerful wall.
The who's who.
Yeah.
And that was in the world probably the center of music retail, really, for a good long run.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now the entire block is gone.
It's changed.
It's a sign of the, unfortunately, of the times. It's going to, I think, you know, going to be big office buildings now. But there were all these little mom and pop shops and Ash and Manny's, and it was an amazing time to be there. But while I was there, I started hearing about this place called Drummers Collective. You know, I wanted to do more studying on drums. I didn't really quite know what this place was. It was kind of an underground. The ads were kind of a little mysterious, you know. I knew it was educational. I didn't know if it was like, you know, you went for a semester, you know, was it more of a like a college or a junior college kind of thing, or one-offs. So one day I just, lunch break, I walked over to the Collective. It was on 42nd Street.
At the time, yeah.
At the time, walked in and, you know, I heard drums. There was 6 rooms, everyone's playing, you know. It was like this real scene. And so I signed up and I started taking lessons at the Collective.
And who was teaching there at that time?
Mike Lauren, Chet DeBow, Kenwood Denard.
Great guys.
Then Kenwood brought in Kim Plainfield, who unfortunately recently passed. Shout out to Kim.
Bless his soul,
Frankie Malabé, another one who legendary.
I knew Frankie well,
We'll come later on, maybe we'll talk about how his book happened, which is a landmark book, I think, for Latin drumming. That we published. So I started studying, and, you know, I was working by day and going over to the Collective at night. I did some practicing there because I was living in an apartment at the time, so I didn't really have a practice space. And I got to know Paul Siegel, who was a student as well at the time, and he was working the front desk. So we got friendly. You know, I didn't really, you know him that well. But, you know, one day I said, hey, you know, you want to get a bite to eat, you know, if you get a lunch break? And I thought, you know, let's go hang a minute, you know, outside of that space where it was just nuts. We went out to lunch. Actually, my wife met us at this, you know, like this little health food restaurant. You know, I think we had peanut butter sandwiches on whole wheat bread, you know. He said, don't tell anybody, but the original founder of the Collective was a fellow from Boston named Rick Kravitz, great percussion player. He played chorus line.
Yes, chorus line.
It ran forever, and that was his that paid his bills. And then by day he was at the Collective, and he had started the Collective in '77. I was a student there in '79, and in very early '80, maybe late '79. We had this lunch, and Paul said, you know, don't tell anybody, but Rick wants to move back. His family owned a very big restaurant, very successful in Boston. He said he had had enough in New York, and he was wanting to move back to Boston, and he wanted to try to sell the Collective, which, you know, it's tough to, how do you evaluate the price of a business? I was a drummer. I had, you know, $1.27 in my pocket. Paul had, you know, $1.27 in his pocket. We both sat down and talked to Rick. You know, we said, listen, we could maybe see doing something here with you, but we have no money, you know. So I don't know how we buy a business with no money. And he said, listen, here's, if you can come up with this much up front, which Paul and I went to our families and said, you know, can we borrow a little bit of money? and they were like, yeah, you know, we want you to have something, you know, this drumming thing, you know, we don't know about, you know. So in March of '80, we suddenly, I went into this office one day, and it was my business. It said Drummers Collective on the door. I had the keys, and here I was 25 and owned a business in New York.
And just that chance meeting with Paul,
yeah,
that's where it started.
That's where it all started.
Unbelievable.
That's where it all started. And my wife, actually, she was the one, she was sitting there when we were having lunch that day, and she said, well, why don't you guys buy it? Because I wasn't thinking about buying a business. You know, how am I going to buy a business? You know, I'm you know, making like $100 a week, you know. That's how it happened. We pieced the money together. We paid out Rick. You know, basically we bought it for the value of the used instruments. You know, he had vibes and a marimba and, you know, 8 or 10 drum sets and a couple of guitar amps and some mics, and we valued that. He said, just pay me for the equipment, and we couldn't even afford that. That we had to pay out over like 2 or 3 years, 2 years or something.
But the students that were there, and then you took over the rent for the building, so you stepped into a level of responsibility of business that was pretty powerful. So from this artistic mentality you were in,
right,
and then you stepped into the retail. Now here you are, you're owning it.
I'm walking in and I got the keys, you know, and I got to pay rent and I got to deal with insurance and figure out how do you run a business, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was a really exciting time. You know, we both had a lot of energy and had ideas. You know, we tried to do some different types of classes, and we wanted to bring in, you know, I felt, and Paul felt too, very strongly that it couldn't just be drums like as a standalone, like isolated. We needed, you know, other instruments because the drummers have to have people to play with.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to make a living playing solo drums.
Right.
You know, there's 1 or 2 people in the world that do that, right?
That's right, that's right.
And it was hard to get guitar players and keyboard players because, you know, as the collective started to grow, people called it Drummers Collective, and it was like, well, I'm a guitar player. What business do I have going to study at Drummers Collective?
Right.
It was a, you know, kind of a
hard balance to find that.
It was tough. So then we started we came up with an idea. Well, let's change the name to Rhythm Section Lab. So it was then for a while we promoted it Rhythm Section Lab, a division of Drummers Collective. And I have an original Rhythm Section Lab T-shirt, you know, and that lasted a couple of years, and it did bring in other players. What I loved was putting together ensembles so that the drummers, you know, at night we'd put these group ensembles together, so it'd be a full rhythm section, it'd be a couple of drummers and a keyboard player and a guitar player, bass player.
Had a chance to play.
And a great, it could be a drummer running the class, or it could have been a guitar player. You know, we had, you know, unbelievable people. Ryo Kawasaki running a fusion workshop, you know, great guitar player. You know, really good, John Schofield, you know.
Powerful. So,
you know, we found guys that would come in and run real, everything was, you know, it was the real deal. Like they'd bring in charts from their own bands, like, you know, not something out of, you know, a printed book that somebody wrote, but these are charts that they were working on, like right then from their records and their, you know, so it was always this, the concept was always to be real, so that, you know, you're seeing a real chart, so when you see one on a gig, you're not like, you know, panicked. It's like, oh yeah, I've been reading charts for 2 years now. So the, you know, it grew. And around about a year and a half into our ownership of the collective, I started to hear from friends of mine that were involved in television about this new device that was coming out that was going to be in every home called a VCR. And I didn't know what a VCR looked like, I didn't know what it did, but I just knew that we needed to do something and start capturing we run these master classes at the school. Got, you know, a lot of local guys or even some out-of-towners when they were passing through. We you know, Lenny White and Bernard Purdy and, you know, the whole cast of characters. And I, you know, kind of realized if there was a way to preserve those so that people in Ireland or Japan or St. Louis, you know, they would want to see this, not just the 50 or 60 people that could fit in the room that we had set up for master classes. So Paul and I, with zero experience in video, borrowed cameras, taped them like lights up to the ceiling. I remember we burned like some ceiling panels at one point. We had no idea what we were doing with production, zero. It's like we learned it on the spot, on the fly, made every mistake possible. And we started learning how to edit and really the most basic, you know, we put together these first couple of videos, you know, Bernard Purdy and Lenny White, a great R&B drummer from New York named Yogi Horton.
I remember Yogi, yeah.
We did John Schofield because he was a friend, he was teaching at the school. And those were the first couple of videos we did. And, you know, I remember, you know, we put a little classified ad in Modern Drummer. I got to know Ron Spagnardi a little bit.
The creator
because
of Modern Drummer, yeah.
The founder of Modern Drummer, and we were advertising the school. So I said, Ron, you know, we got this idea, we're going to try to sell an instructional video. And he said, okay, you know, we put a classified ad in the back, and, you know, 2 weeks later, a couple of checks came in the mail. I said, wow, this is amazing, you know, what a business. We're home, I'm home sleeping, and a check's coming in the mail the next day. And
who was editing this stuff here? Who was
Paul and I, and we, you know, I forget the name of some of the people in the, you know, really early days of video editing.
Yeah,
and I'm
sure,
talking 81.
Yeah, this
you know,
was the beginning
80,
of the
81.
entire industry.
I didn't have a VCR at that point in time, but we were filming videos. I eventually, you know, got the VCR, but I actually, our first project, we filmed it, neither Paul or I even had a VCR. We just knew we had to figure out how to capture this presentation.
Fantastic.
And so those first couple came out, and we, you know, started to advertise, and, you know, it wasn't lighting the world on fire, but, you know, we were charging $79.95 for a VHS video. And we thought maybe there's a real, you know, this could be a real business. So Paul and I kind of made a decision at that point to really start focusing on the video side of the business of the school. And that's why the original company was DCI Music Video. It stood for Drummers Collective, Inc. We couldn't figure out what to call it, so we said DCI. At the time, I was listening to a lot of music by a drummer named Steve Gadd. And Steve, at the time, was not really visible. He was recording day and night.
Oh yeah, he was unreachable.
Unreachable, workaholic, worked literally around the clock, and I just said, this is the guy. His playing would literally, you know, drive me to tears. Still does. I'll get choked up now if I think about some of his music. But, you know, like the Ricky Lee Jones "We Belong Together," that opening fill he does, he turns the time around. I mean, just stuff to me that was like mind-blowing. You know, it was like when I was, you know, 10 years old and listening to Mitch Mitchell the first time. You know, Steve just, my head exploded, you know.
Steve changed the industry. Chuck is in Love, all those fantastic,
the Paul Simon records.
They opened up all of our minds. Really
changed the sound of the way drums were recorded. You know, I mean, he invented the disco beat.
Absolutely.
You know.
And it changed the drum set, because at that time it was a 12, 13-inch tom and a 16-inch floor tom. Steve came up with the idea of a 10-inch, which was a concert tom that he had a bottom head put on. So he made the 10-inch.
Professional Percussion Center.
I was there when that happened. Then he had the 12-inch. Then he had a 13 and 14-inch tom. Well, the 13 and 14, you couldn't put legs on it. So he invented the Tommy, the floor tom hanging mount. So Steve was way ahead of the curve on what he did. And then when that happened, that changed. Now to this day, 30, 40 years later, we still use that same configuration. And that same stuff. So his brilliance. So you tapped into him at that stage. That's fantastic. And he was in New York.
He was in New York. I was relentless. You know, I was like I haunted him. I'd leave, you know, messages on his machine. Weeks would go by. Then he'd return a call, and he was like, I can't think of doing this. I'm really busy. And I'd say, well, I'm going to call you in 2 weeks. And I'd call him back, and I literally, you know, didn't stop. I mean, the fact that this guy didn't, like, you know, punch me out at some point. Well, I was a bug, like, on him.
But that's persistence at the highest level, Rob. That's a great quality. That's a great quality.
I knew it'd be a game changer for me to be able to sit and hear him talk about these things and watch him play, because he was barely doing even live gigs. It was just studio. Jingles in the morning, like 2 or 3 record dates a day.
At that time he was playing McKell's.
He was playing McKell's,
so
but
if you could go see him live, but if you knew you had to kind of be in that clique. You know, I met Steve in 1977, and I got to know Steve at that time, and I would hang with him and be with him, and he was a very private person, and still is it that way. And your name would come up, and he would ask about
Is that right?
That's
funny.
What's the collective? What's the drummers collective? He was asked. So I mean, at that time,
funny.
Here you are coming from one angle, and he was thinking about it. So,
one short story.
Yeah.
And it was really the turning point. You know, he kept kind of blowing me off, and you know, I understood how busy he was. I would sometimes meet him at a session, and we'd talk for 10 minutes, and then he'd go in and work, and I'd leave. You know, he kind of wanted to do something, but he didn't really want to. You know, he's, as you know, because I know how well you know him. Yeah. He doesn't think about his drumming a lot. He doesn't sit and say, "Oh, you know, that fill I did on this record was an inverted paradiddle, you know, flamingcue." You know, it's music for him. It comes out. You know, it's like Eric Clapton with a solo. It just sort of he taps into another place and it happens.
Yeah.
So we had gotten close to actually talking about doing a project and going in the studio and filming. And one day I had him on the phone, and he must have been, I'm sure, like overly exhausted. He said, "Listen, don't call me anymore," you know, and hangs up the phone. and it was a little choice words beyond that, which we won't talk about. Jules told me I can't, you know, go into some of that language. No. So it was not pretty. And I sat, I was like so dejected after months and months of just relentless, you know, not taking no for an answer. I really thought this might be it. Like, he's really angry at me. But I knew that night, and I don't remember how, but I knew he was going to be recording in Times Square, not far from the collective, at Ralph McDonald's studio called Rosebud.
Yes, yes, yes.
Now, I didn't know what time it was in his session. So I used to drive home with my wife. We both worked she worked on the, at the time at the Daily News. She was the other end of 42nd Street. You know, we drove in, we drive home together. I said to her, "Listen, I'm not coming home with you tonight. I don't know what time I'm coming home, but I just feel there's something I have to do." And, you know, I didn't even tell her what it was. Later on I did. I said, it's, you know, it may be a late night, it may not be, I don't know. And I literally, after I got done at the collective, I sat on the sidewalk outside of Rosebud. And I was like, "Oh my, am I really doing this?" It's like I'm sitting on a street corner in Times Square. And I sat and I walked around, I walked up and down the block. You know, people like must have like thought I was a homeless person, right? I don't know, from memory, maybe, you know, I talked about this story much, but maybe an hour, 2 hours went by, and all of a sudden Steve comes around the corner and Carol's a couple of steps behind him.
His wife,
Carol Gadd. And I had developed a nice rapport with Carol, and you know, she kind of knew I was coming from a good place, and my, you know, love of Steve's, you know, music. And all of a sudden, you know, I could see he was like not in a good place. And she sees me on the sidewalk, and she goes like, she starts holding her head. And she's like, I could just see her saying, "Oh my God." And Steve comes right up to me, and he's like, "You know, I told you, don't ever, you know, I'm done, forget it, we're not doing that project." And I didn't back down. You know, I'm quite a bit taller than Steve, but he was like in it, and I was like, this guy's gonna I'm this close to getting slugged by Steve Gadd, like what a story. I didn't back down. I said, "Listen, you know, I'm not letting you go that easily. You know, we spent a lot of time, we've talked about this, it's gonna be great, you're gonna be happy you did it. I know it's the right thing for you and it's the right thing for me." And he said, "All right, well, come inside." And I went into the session, and my heart was like beating out of my chest. And that was the turning point with my relationship with Steve. You know, and that's, you know, I wish I remembered better that session, because I know it was Richard T., Marcus Miller, Ralph. It was like all the 18.
The whole stuff band that was there.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. But I was so emotional, like, because I confronted, you know, Steve like that on the street, and that was it. After that, it was not long after that we did the first video.
But I must say, in Steve's perspective of what it is, first of all, he's an extremely emotional person. At that time in his life, I remember very well the intensity of what he was performing and playing. He would sometimes do 3 albums a day.
Oh, absolutely.
And then go and play at night. So I mean, the demand for what Steve was doing, and every song in every album was a classic, powerful performance that Steve put his entire soul into.
Yeah, bouncing off the seat. You know.
I mean, in a session in the corner, giving everything he had for that song. Then they'd pause for a second, he'd go to the next song and do it again. And he would do that album after album, cut after cut, gig after gig. And he wasn't doing any touring, it was just the New York scene. At that time, the vibrant recording scene, going from session to session. He had a drum set set up in one studio, second session,
zigzag.
Boom, zigzag, take set from number 1, put it in number 3, I'm doing number 2. And I would be there with him at those times, and it was just intense. So his intensity was so full. So the educational side of his ability, he didn't see it yet, but you opened that door. Rob, that is fantastic that you were able to pull him in. And once you get Steve Gadd, you get everybody else.
Well, that program internationally put the video company on the map, because I mean, it was not long after it came out, I was in Europe, people actually would recognize me because I was in the video.
You sat in the video with Steve asking them questions. That was wonderful.
So that's I don't know, I could go on for days, but very quick. I had prepared questions. He basically said, all right, listen, I'm going to go to the studio, I think it was a Sunday. I'll be there at noon. You have me for the afternoon. That's pretty much it. You ask me questions, and I'll answer the best I can.
Great.
So I said, okay, anything to get it in the door. We got his drums in. It was a real close friend of mine's studio. They're still there in the Film Center building on 9th Avenue in Manhattan. We set up his drums, a couple of cameras, a couple of lights. At this point, we had graduated, from taping lights on the ceiling. We actually had like light stands and a real crew guys, like professional camera people, I had planned to sit kind of under the camera so that Steve would look at me and, he'd be behind his kit, I'd be out in front of the kit. And I was maybe 8 or 10 feet away from him under the camera, so it looked like he was talking into the camera. Right. And we would decide later, would you hear my questions or would you just hear Steve's answers? We would figure that out. And right before we're ready to roll, Steve said, this isn't right. I think it would be much better if you sit here next to me. And I was wearing like a funky old t-shirt because I had no intentions of being on camera. I said, me, I was like petrified, like, like 26, 23, whatever I was. I'm sitting next to Steve Gadd, who was at the time and still is my, one of my real heroes. And so the cameraman said, you can borrow my sweater. And what I wore was the cameraman's sweater, no exaggeration. And it was the start of, an unbelievable relationship with him. We did many projects. There was one point in time when people couldn't reach him because he was working so much. Zildjian used to call me to get messages to him.
Absolutely,
One time I flew up with his cymbals for an afternoon. He had a few hours off. They wanted to put logos. His cymbals didn't have any Zildjian logos.
Exactly right.
So I think it was Armin or Colin called, said, could you come up, tomorrow? I just talked to Steve Gadd. He's not working tomorrow, and we really want to put logos on his cymbals. And he trusts you to bring them up. And I went up there, we went out for lunch, they stamped the cymbals. I got on a plane, it was like within a couple of hours, and I delivered the cymbals to Steve. I mean,
fantastic.
It became, he did a few things at the collective, like, our lives were really sort of, interactive at that point. I'd push the stroller with his kids,
Absolutely, but that's how he is.
He's a family guy.
He's a real family guy. And listen, the same thing. Lady the Museo at the times when he was with Zildjian would contact me in those early days. Can you get a hold of Steve? So the way Steve was removed from the companies. He didn't really need them, and the companies needed him more than he needed them. He had the product that he played. He had cracked cymbals, and he had pieces of cymbal that were cut out of it, but he loved the sound, and his sound was that sound. So he wasn't interested in any newer stuff. And it's guys like yourself and eventually myself, we opened Steve up to a bigger picture of the industry that he really wasn't aware of. And the fact that you were there, Rob, to do that, you opened up this great artist to a whole other level. That's huge. It
was the inspiration that people that watched the video got and still get it. It's like I still get people, stopping me right here at the NAMM show. Thank you for the work you did. You inspired me when I was 15, and now I'm a full-time drummer. And I mean, it's really rewarding. You can't put a price on that. And Steve was one of those guys that inspired, I mean, it still inspires, I don't know, he's 72, I think, or 73 now. But he's still inspiring generations of guys.
But that's what you did. You opened up this pre-internet awareness of connecting the world together that was powerful, that you had this persistence to do it and stay with it. And then you went from Steve to everybody else.
Yeah, then it kind of opened the floodgates. Yeah, and I mean, recently I've been going through, we have these 2 storage lockers with all the masters, and literally for 15 years I've been wanting to go through, see what's there, throw out, you know, everything from old tax returns, but there's edit notes from projects, you know, I mean, it was unbelievable, these notes. I found a Louis Belson manuscript that never came out. So, you know, I've been in the trenches cleaning out stuff, and I just came, you know, I came across projects I even forgot about. You know, people say to me, you know, what are kind of the landmark people you worked with or projects that you did? Steve certainly at the top of the list, and that first one, you know, it really sprung kind of the whole instructional drum world.
That started.
You know, that really started the whole thing going. And then we just worked like crazy. We hired people to kind of run the collective because we saw the possibilities with the video, because it was beyond the 4 walls. You know, it was way beyond the space. And you know, we thought there was a real big potential to bring video to people all over the world. And we were in a good spot to do it because we had all these, you know, the collective was like a think tank, or, you know, I don't know what you'd call it, you know, rhythms were being invented, Frankie Malabe, like the Latin stuff. People were coming in and really inventing drum parts and patterns and styles.
It was a creative hub, it really was.
That's the word for it. In 1985, Jocko Pastorius started, he was living in New York, and we got to know Jocko. He did some teaching at the school, and it was during a period when he was in pretty good shape. He'd kind of come in and out. Everyone knows those stories, which we don't have to dwell on. But his playing, I mean, he changed. He's another. He changed the instrument. Period. End of story. You know, there was pre-Jocko, and then there was after Jocko for the electric bass. And you know, we got to know Jocko. We ended up figuring out a way to contain the energy that he had to get him to go into a studio. Same place we recorded the Gadd stuff. Jocko had recommended bringing in Jerry Jamot because he really respected Jerry. And Jerry could talk to Jocko in a way and say, okay, this is what you're going to do, and this is when you're going to do it, and this is how you're going to do it. So Jerry became a real good conduit to make that project happen. Yeah, incredible.
And we interviewed Jerry Jamot.
Oh, you did?
We did, yeah.
Oh, I mean, his history, I mean, that's a whole other, I don't even want to talk about King Curtis and Aretha and Purdy. You know, Jerry and Purdy were, you know, an unbelievable rhythm section, but I digress. So we got to film the Jocko Project, which was, and I think will always be a landmark, because 2 years later Jocko was killed. It's one of the only documents, other than on stage, you know, in a concert, you know, venue or a club venue on a home camera, you know, there's footage around, but nothing like that, where Jocko's really talking about the bass and what and the how and the why. So that was a landmark, and that kind of resurfaced a year and a half ago. Peter Erskine put me in touch with a person that was doing a film on Jocko, Robert Trujillo, from the bass player in Metallica.
Right.
So Peter said, he called me up and he said, you really got to talk to Robert Trujillo. I, you know, of course, knew who he was, but didn't know him from Adam, and we ended up talking and really hit off a really nice vibe. I flew out to LA, met him, we just, you know, hit it off. And I helped him license the Jocko footage, because Alfred now owns that DCI catalog. We had sold the company to Warner, and then Warner sold it to Alfred, so Alfred owns it. So I set up a meeting, I introduced him to the guys at Alfred, and we made that happen so that he could use a lot of excerpts from the instructional video in his film, which he spent 6 years making. And I don't know if you've seen it, it's an absolute wonderful piece of filmmaking. A must-see for any musician.
Anybody to be inspired, any artist. If you're a dancer, you're going to get something out of it. If you act, you're going to get something out of it. Really brilliant.
So the Jocko resurfaced. You know, I ended up like sort of back in Jocko world. Robert ended up wanting to hear my little story about Jocko teaching at the school. He came into New York with a cameraman and interviewed me, and that ended up in the film. I don't know how this, some of these things I don't have any idea how they happen, including being here today. It's just like my life has been blessed.
But that's why I say the story that you have, the force that you've created, and that you shifted people's mindset in education and delivering these masters at their craft in a way that they had never been delivered before.
Yeah.
And now, and in my own home, I can watch Gadd, I can watch Simon Phillips, Dennis Chambers, all these guys that you pulled in that were just names now became real to them in their home, and that really spawned this business incredibly. And how'd that lead to Hudson?
DCI was chugging along, and it was growing quickly, and sometimes businesses, if you're not funded properly, and Paul and I, like I said, started out with $1.27 in our pockets, you know, we would just plow everything back into the company, you know, so it kind of funneled itself, it funded itself, I should say. We had a couple of angels along the way. Our partner in England, he ran Warner Brothers England, would help us financially. Yamaha Japan would help us financially. We had a man named Jim Fanata who became an angel and a huge supporter of us, and went so far and above and beyond. He would prepay like purchase orders so that we had cash flow to keep producing, because everyone wanted the product, because it would sell. But you know, you get on this treadmill where you're spending a little bit faster than it's coming in, and that's not a good situation for business. So we got to know Sandy Feldstein. We had the idea of starting a book division, which we called Manhattan Music. We started working on a book with Frankie Malabé out of all of his kind of work and inventions from the collective, from all the teaching. And that, we had also no idea how to publish a book, how to edit a book, how to put a book, no idea. And our concept, which was really nuts, was it was going to be a drum book with maps and ethnic, you know, photographs of all this ethnic, you know, historical footage. It's like, you know, we all grew up on Ted Reed and you know, Syncopate, all those books, which were notes, one page, next page, more notes, next page, more notes. Maybe it'd be a picture of a drummer, like occasionally you'd see in one of these books. Well, this was like there were going to be maps to show where the rhythms, how they came up through Africa, and some went through Puerto Rico, and some through Cuba, and some through New Orleans, and we were telling people we're going to do these drum books, but they're going to be different, you know. And people are looking like, "What do you mean? There's a map in a drum book?" You know. So we were crazy. It took like 2.5 years to get that book put together, and then we did, you know, kind of a whole series of the ethnic books. You know, we did a book called Funkifying the Clave with Robbie Amin and Lincoln Goins. It was bass and drums. Mike Stern played on that. It was just on and on. You know, we were producing like crazy. So then we met Sandy Feldstein. He was at the time just transitioning from leaving Alfred to go work for CPP Bellwin, Columbia Pictures Publications. They had a print division of this big corporation, and Sandy went to run CPP Bellwin.
Absolutely.
Which, a huge publisher.
And Sandy, just so the audience understands, Sandy was a phenomenal percussionist and a musician and a composer, 700 works he's published.
Crazy.
An amazing, with an incredible vision of what he had. So the fact that you met up with Sandy, this brilliant
We met up
energy.
with Sandy, and he wanted to get involved with what we were doing. And, you know, looking back on it, it was crazy, but he gave us, without a written contract, just on a handshake. I mean, business was different in those days, you know. Jim Fanata and Warner Europe. I mean, a lot of this stuff was handshake, which would never happen, unfortunately, today. But Sandy gave us a whole pile of money and said, "Here, go produce. I want you to have the money. Someday, you know, we're going to be really working closer together, but right now I know you guys have ideas. I have access to some money. I'll distribute your books. Go produce." And that was it. So we started cranking out books under Manhattan Music and producing the videos. And then Sandy approached us to buy the whole company. And it was right around the time that Warner Brothers was purchasing CPP Bellwin. So I became an employee of CPP Bellwin because I had a contract to work for them. And my contract got, you know, kind of just moved to Warner Brothers. All the terms of my agreement were intact, but I now had a Warner Brother ID card, you know, and I could go to places and get a discount, you know. It was amazing. So all of a sudden, Paul and I are employees of Warner Brothers. You know, we stayed in New York. We ran this division. Sandy, he was the greatest boss. He was in Miami. He'd say, when you need to meet with me, you know, get on a plane. So we would definitely see him like just come December, January, February, you know, because it was nice to be in Florida.
To get out of New York in the winter.
Yeah, and he was totally hands off. Like, he just let us, it was amazing. I don't think it was ever a project. I'd fax down, this was like pre, you know, email. I'd fax down this one-page sheet. It was like who the project was with, what was the estimated budget, you know, what was, you know, a little, you know, bullet point outline of what the content was. And he'd write back and he'd approve it. And, you know, a week later, the check was, you know, it was in the account, and it was an amazing relationship. He just wanted us to produce, you know, day and night. And we worked like dogs because we produced, I don't know how, I've never kept count, but in the hundreds of titles.
Absolutely.
So I don't even know. But the employment contract expired in 1997 or 98, and we had a 1-year non-compete. And Sandy had gotten pushed out of Warner's by that point. They kind of were taken over by accountants, and it lost a lot of the sizzle and kind of the fun.
The business changed.
It became very corporate. Absolutely. It was, you know, profit and loss statements, and, you know, it's like, come on guys, we're making, you know, drum videos here. It didn't feel right. So and then they wanted us to move down to Florida because they wanted to save the expenses of having an office in New York. And we said, no, we weren't ready to move to Florida. So the contract ended. We had a 1-year non-compete. We produced a few projects for them in that 1 year, so we had some work going on. And then we started Hudson Music. Kind of picked up, you know, where DCI left off.
How powerful. And you produced tons of books with Hudson Music.
Yeah, and now it's all book-based because the kind of the DVD market is completely changed
dramatically, and almost non-existent in the process. But then you went into digigital. So so what I'm always impressed about with you, Rob, is that you've may not have understood what you were getting involved with, but you got involved. You believe so much. Like even the digital world now, you got involved in the digital world. And
well, we went from Thomas Edison to digital, you know?
That's exactly right.
You know, you have to provide content, which at the end of the day, that's all I was doing. You know, a book, a video, you know, whatever. It's content. You know, it's amazing to see, you know, where it's come to at this point, where it's, you know, you can be anywhere in the world and download a book. It's wonderful because it breaks down the barriers of printing and shipping and import duties and export duties. And, you know, how do you get books to South America? You know, the mail systems are not like they are in this country. So, you know, we would send a pallet of books down and they'd get lost, and because somebody wanted a little bit of VIG, you know, under the table at the customs, you know, desk.
And if they didn't get it, the books just sat in the corner.
And eventually they end up in the ocean somewhere, you know.
Exactly right. So it changed.
There are definitely pluses and minuses with the digital delivery, but I think largely I'm really getting excited about what I'm seeing, you know, these digital platforms. You know, we have this digital book reader that, so if you have an iPad, you have your page. If there's music, you just tap it and it'll play. If it's an audio track, you'll hear the audio. If it's a drum beat, you'll hear the beat. You know, you tap it again, you shut it off. If there's a video icon, you tap it and a box pops up and there's the video. You don't have to take your book, you know, plug a video in, search and find the spot. It's right there in front of you. So I actually think it's the best format that I've seen for delivering that type of content. Right there on your iPad.
But then with all of that going on, then just talk briefly about Drum Guru. Then you put together this concept of, now with all these artists that you had met and you knew very well, relationships you had with them.
Right.
The products they already produced and new product you could produce to deliver it in a different way, that was a whole nother idea.
Well, you know, I had my kids in the house and I saw them, you know, doing things on their phone, you know, with apps, and I figured, well, I kind of got to be cool, you know. I got to do something so I get some cred in the house, you know. So I just thought, one, I'm a huge, from day one, Apple fan. I have no idea how to turn on a PC. You know, people think, oh, you must be like really technical. You've been producing and video and blah blah blah. No, I don't know how to turn on, you know, an Android device or anything. So I thought about something just really simple. I said, wow, imagine if kids are on a school bus coming home from school and they want to just watch some drumming, or they're on the beach on vacation. So I kind of came up with the idea of delivering video through an app that you could then purchase, you know, have kind of a catalog of artists and concepts, and you, right in the app through your iTunes account, you hit a button, you buy it, a lesson pack. They were $2.99, you know, really inexpensive, and it's like no fuss, no muss. You know, within 30 seconds, you find, okay, I want, you know, Steve Gadd, boom, I hit that one, or I want, you know, Chad Smith, boom, I buy that. It downloads into my phone, and you get to see video lessons. They're 2, 3, 4 minute video clips. You hit another button, it transcribes what they're playing, and then you can hit another button and you can hear the drum part and watch the transcription, and you can speed it up and slow it down.
You can control it, I love that part of it,
So it, you know, it's really simple to use. I wanted it to kind of be, you know, easy. Just no, you know, no technical nothing. It's like you download the thing, you hit a button, and within a minute you're watching a video with whoever.
Absolutely. Well, look at what you got. You have Steve Gadd, Chad Smith, Peter Erskine. You've got Joe Bergamini. Incredible. Joe, incredible guys we have.
I think we have 130 lesson packs.
Fantastic players you have on there, which is fantastic. So, and how you delivered it. I got to ask you about a couple of guys that you really kind of opened up with. Dennis Chambers.
Okay.
Dennis Chambers. You guys basically introduced him to the world from the video. I mean, it really was that level of impact.
The Buddy Rich show that we did in...
The tribute in '89, October of '89.
Yes, at the Wiltern Theater in LA.
In LA, yeah.
Kathy wanted, you know, she had started doing these scholarship, she called it the Buddy Rich Memorial Scholarship Concert, and we connected with Kathy and filmed a bunch of them, but the one in LA was amazing. It was Louis, Greg Bissonette, Vinny, Dave Weckl, Steve Gadd, and kind of the new guy on the block at that point was Dennis Chambers.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, not to say he hadn't been doing amazing gigs at that point, but he was really under the radar. I don't know if he was covered, like, let's say, in Modern Drummer up to that point. Yeah. He was playing with, I think, P-Funk, and, you know, doing regional gigs and stuff where he lived, but there was a buzz about him, and I forget how Kathy kind of connected with him, but brought in Dennis, and, you know, he
tore it up.
He blew people's heads up, you know. I mean, everybody that night. It was one of the landmark moments in my life, just watching this thing happen. A drum show, you know, I don't know if it'll ever, you know, the cards will line up like that. You know, there was a couple of days of rehearsals. I mean, just somebody asked me about this recently. Just backstage during sound check, everybody was sharing ideas. You know, I like to say, and I'm sure you do too, you know, the drum world is a giant fraternity of, I call it the hug fest, you know, like the PAS shows, NAMM, you know, it's a giant hug fest. And not all instruments are like that. Drums, I think, are the most fraternal instrument.
Easily,
Guitar players are more private. They don't want to share their stuff, you know, they kind of like to, you know, turn away and not show you what they're doing. Drummers are like, come here, let me show you. You want me to slow it down? And that's really, I think, part of the reason why our business grew the way it did, was this openness of sharing.
Absolutely.
And, you know, had it been a different instrument, you know, I don't know about trumpet players, you know, I don't know enough of those.
Well, none of those other instruments have ever really done what the drumming community has done. The drumming community leads because of that community for sharing, that love of each other, the respect for each other.
Thing.
It's a whole study in its own. Chambers came out, it was an incredible showcase. Another guy, Neil Peart.
Somewhat along the lines of you know, haunting Steve Gadd, Neil then got into the sights, and we didn't let go. It was like a dog with a bone, you know. Back in those days, there were fax machines, but Neil was a different guy. You wrote to him.
Yeah.
You know, Lenny used to say from Zildjian, when I needed to reach Neil, I never called him, I wrote to him.
Yeah.
And Neil would write to me and say, I'm starting a tour, here's the symbols I need. It was all done with letters.
Yeah.
You know, we had gotten Neil's you know, home address along the way, and we wrote, and a couple of weeks went by, he wrote back, you know, I'm getting ready for a Rush record, I'm doing a Rush tour, or I'm, you know, going cross country on my bike, I'm going to Africa, you know, whatever it was. Yeah. We kept getting pushed away, and we didn't stop. You know, Paul and I would alternate. He would write, Neil would eventually respond. A few months later, I would write. A few months later, Neil would respond. And this went on for a couple of years. I remember being in England and getting a call. I don't know remember if Paul was with me at the time, and somebody from the office called, or Paul called to tell me, Neil, we got a letter from Neil, and it said, I give up, you won. You know, we wore him down. And, you know, we started a relationship. The first thing we did with Neil was actually, I think it was the Burning for Buddy.
Right.
He did a 2-record set for Atlantic Records. Right. Brought in 22 drummers in the course of 7 days a week for 2 weeks.
Each playing a Buddy Rich song.
Each playing a Buddy song, and I mean, it was the absolute, you know, who's who of drumming. It was, you know, unbelievable. Also a historic and you know, another one of these landmarks that I was able to kind of be a fly on the wall. Neil trusted Paul and I at this point, and said, I don't want anyone else, you know, I don't want you to hire cameramen, I want you guys to run the cameras. We didn't have cameras. We literally went out and bought, at that time, you know, high-8 cameras. We bought some lights. We learned how to turn the camera on and how to, and he said, listen, I just want you to document everything from the morning, as soon as we walk in, just have the cameras going, 2 cameras, which is pretty tricky, covering a 16-piece band, drummers, people out in the, you know, in the lobby, you know. It was just an amazing, you know, fantastic. Steve Jordan and I mean, on and on. Simon Phillips, Garibaldi, everybody, Weckel. It was just nuts.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So we filmed all that and put out the Burning for Buddy stuff. Then we got to work with Neil on his first instructional. We went up to Woodstock for a couple of days in the winter, and he said, "Oh, great, I can snowshoe." So he walked to the studio, you know, in his you know, went to the first morning. He was like, where's Neil? All of a sudden we see, like, coming in the distance, he's coming down in snowshoes in the snow, walking, you know, to the studio, you know. Yeah, that was a landmark.
What a special talent.
An unbelievable, that probably was the biggest selling instructional project I ever did. That, and Paul and I worked on these beginner guitar videos that Fender put in all of their beginner packs for many, many years. That sold, you know, crazy numbers, but Neil's thing was, I remember Sandy calling up saying, "Oh my God, you know, they would get in 2,000 and the next day they'd ship them out, and we'd get 3,000 and they would ship out." I mean, it was like the real peak of the timing was just perfect.
And Neil is another special talent. That is just, you know, just unbelievable that you had this involvement with him. But your
amazing.
Perseverance, your intensity, your vision, the innovative, you know, ideas that you had. This is all a part of why I said in the beginning, the force that you have been, yourself and Paul, was really just so magical that you literally changed the industry.
Well, thank you.
In closing, what would you say to just quickly to the young people that are listening, of what you can give to them, to deliver to them ideas of how you found the balance of your artistic ability and your business side, and you made it all happen to have a wonderful life of what you've done. What can you deliver to them? What can you tell them?
I think you have to look at what's out there, and let's say you want to decide, I want to go to music school, I want to be a professional musician. You graduate one of the schools, and it's like, okay, what do I do now? You know, it's something similar to what I had when I said, you know, I want to go to Drummers Collective. It's like, I came back from Florida before I owned a business or anything, didn't know any musicians. You know, you have to figure out how to get started. And I think the advice I would give to a person coming out of music school is you have to be able to do many things to put them together to earn a living, unless you're fortunate enough in the minute percent to hit a band, you know, like our dear friend Chad Smith, and you ride the Chili Peppers for 25 years, you know, but the number of people that hit a band like that, you know, you can count on two hands probably.
Yeah.
So, you know, you need to be creative in piecing together your income, which means you got to be able to play all styles of music so that you never have to turn down a gig, because you never know what gig you're going to be on and someone else sees you and leads you to the next gig. And you want to get that positive spiral happening.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to play a lot of styles of music. You have to be able to read music, because people don't have the time and money for a lot of rehearsing. Maybe back when we were kids, we'd rehearse in the basement. Now it's like you hand a chart, you know, might be the morning of the show, and you do the show that night, or, you know, you may have a rehearsal and then do a show 2 days later.
Yeah.
But so you got to be able to read. You have to be professional. You need to be the kind of person that somebody is looking forward to seeing. I think we all know there are people in the world that you kind of see them coming down the street, and you kind of see if there's an alleyway you can duck in, because you really don't want to start that conversation. So I always tried to be the person that somebody was happy to see. You know, they'd want to call you back for a gig, or they'd want to call you back for the next book or video project. But in terms of really doing it, I mean, I had no, I really mean it. If I could do it, anybody could do it. It took a lot of hard work. It took a lot of, at times, faith, blind faith and guts, because financially we'd be rolling crazy budgets and we didn't have the money in the bank at the time. It was like, how are we going to pay for this? I don't know. We'll figure it out. And I've really always, knock on wood, been blessed that somehow the money followed. Yeah. Like the Buddy Rich show in LA, I mean, it was really expensive. We had an audio truck and a video truck. 3 hours before the show, the union got wind of the show, and they demanded Paul and I go down to the union office and pay all the benefits and dues, you know, the fees for union musicians being filmed and performing. They said, if you don't do it, we're going to call the fire department. They're going to shut your show down. This is like 3 hours before. No one knows this, before the show. And we had to come up with a check right then and there to pay, I forget, it was several $1,000s, unexpected, for the union part of it, which, you know, we probably should have dealt with up front. But even the guys in the band, I don't want to say anything about the union, but, so, I mean, we've been through some hair-raising, you know, times.
But you found a way to resolve it all.
You always, you know, try to be reasonable, treat people the way you want to be treated. We were always respectful, even when the union guy was like in my face like that, you know. And, you know, you kind of put one foot in front of the other, and really, I just feel so blessed that all these, you know, years later, I still love doing it. I still love creating projects. I still love figuring out how we're going to deliver it. You know, I just had a meeting with our Japanese distributor. We're going to start a Japanese website where people locally can go to a website to get digital versions of all our work in Japanese.
Fantastic.
You know, so these are the areas that are exciting to me. We just launched our first book in Chinese and Mandarin, the Benny Greb book. It's done really well in a short period of time. We have plans to do more. You know, foreign language things are, to me, a real opportunity.
And that's the next step.
Yeah,
to reach the world in those level of publications.
Right.
It's incredible that you have constantly innovated. You're still doing it. You changed the business the way it was, and at this particular point, you are still changing the business. Think about that.
Well,
that's pretty powerful what you've done, Rob. I thank you so much for what you've done. It really is beautiful.
Well, I'm honored to be here with you, and honored to be part of this series. I think it's fabulous, the work that you do and Jules does and her organization. And I've been just, you know, really admire from the distance, you know, everything you guys have done. It's great for musicians. It's a great service you provide. And, you know, I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the Sessions, Rob, we thank you so much. Keep it going.